Nina Taylor's heart raced as she stepped into the sleek, intimidating conference room of Storm CP's headquarters. Her worn flats and modest thrift store outfit stood in sharp contrast to the polished suits of the executives seated around the long mahogany table. They exchanged looks, their glances scanning her from head to toe, clearly unimpressed. Nina knew what this was about. It wasn't just about the interview. It was about proving she belonged. She had spent years working behind the scenes, contributing to the success of Storm CP, but no one knew her face. Elias Storm, the company's elusive CEO and co-founder, had always kept their relationship private. She had built the algorithms that powered Storm CP's AI, devised the systems that kept the empire running smoothly, but none of that mattered in this room. She was just another candidate in their eyes, not the woman who had helped forge the company's success. The interview began, and the tension was palpable. Tyler Hensley, the son of a wealthy tech mogul, gave her a dismissive look as he asked about her experience. "So, tell us about your experience with corporate systems. Do you have the kind of background we're looking for?" His tone was condescending, as if he already assumed she didn't measure up. Nina held his gaze. "I've built systems from the ground up. Storm CP's entire infrastructure, its AI-driven innovations, the framework that runs the company today, those are my creations," she replied coolly. Tyler smirked, as though he had heard enough. "Right, but what about your educational background? Surely someone with your experience would have, I don't know, a degree in something more impressive." The other executives chimed in, mocking her background, pointing out the lack of credentials that matched their expectations. They belittled her modest resume, dismissing her real-world achievements as insignificant. Nina remained calm, but inside the humiliation stung. She knew they didn't see her for what she was, a genius who had played a key role in creating Storm CP's empire. The panel's behavior grew more blatant and cruel. They laughed at her, questioning why someone like her would even apply for a position at a high-level company like theirs. The comments became more personal, targeting her appearance, her modest upbringing, and her lack of a prestigious education. It was clear they weren't interested in her skills. They were interested in putting her in her place. As the interview ended, Nina felt the weight of their disdain hanging over her. They dismissed her with a curt nod, their laughter echoing through the corridors as she walked away. Yet despite the sting of their words, Nina held her head high. She had not come here to win their approval. She had come to remind herself of who she really was. The humiliating treatment didn't stop at the conference room door. The moment Nina stepped into the hallway, the laughter of the panel followed her like a shadow. They were still mocking her. Whispers of, "Who does she think she is?" and "This is a joke," echoed around her as she walked away from the meeting. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of their rejection pressing down on her chest. Outside the building, she paused for a moment to collect herself. She stared at her reflection in the glass door. The woman who had walked into that room had been strong, confident, and proud of her accomplishments. Now she saw only the woman they wanted her to be, a failure, a nobody who couldn't even survive a corporate interview. But Nina knew better than to let their cruel words define her. She had built Storm CP with Elias, had fought for every inch of success the company had achieved. The fact that these executives didn't recognize that didn't change the truth. She was more than their superficial judgments. Still, the sting of the moment lingered as she returned home. When she entered their apartment, Elias immediately noticed the weariness in her eyes. He put down the papers he was working on and crossed the room to her. "What happened?" he asked softly. Nina sighed and recounted the events, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. Elias's expression darkened with each word she spoke. He knew Storm CP better than anyone, and he knew the kind of people who ran it. He had always shielded Nina from the corporate world, wanting to keep her safe from the kind of prejudice she had faced today. "That's it," Elias said with cold determination. "This isn't over." Nina met his gaze, knowing exactly what he meant. The executives had just made the mistake of a lifetime. Later that evening, Elias called an emergency board meeting, gathering the senior leadership of Storm CP into the conference room. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made everyone uneasy. They had no idea what was coming. 3. Meeting began with the usual formalities, but Elias quickly dismissed them. "I'm not here to discuss quarterly reports," he said, his tone cutting through the room. "I'm here to address a serious issue. Yesterday, one of my most trusted partners was humiliated in the most unprofessional manner possible." Elias paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier smugness replaced by confusion. Then Elias dropped the bombshell. "Nina Taylor," he said, his voice steady but filled with quiet fury. "My wife." The room went silent. The executives had no idea. They had no idea that the woman they had mocked and belittled was the very same person who had been responsible for every successful system that ran Storm CP. They had laughed at her, dismissed her, not knowing that she was the architect of the empire they relied on. Elias continued. "For years, Nina has worked tirelessly behind the scenes. The AI, the architecture, the algorithms, the success of this company is largely because of her. And yesterday, you made the mistake of thinking she was just some random candidate who didn't belong here." As he spoke, the executives' faces turned pale. They had no words. The reality of their actions began to sink in. They had underestimated the one person who had played the biggest role in Storm CP's rise to power. Elias was not done. The room had fallen completely still as he played a recording of the interview. The panel's cruelty, their condescending remarks, the insults, it was all there, in high definition. The executives' faces turned crimson as they watched themselves mock Nina, dismiss her, and belittle her contributions to the company. Elias stood before them, unwavering. "This is who you mocked. This is who you humiliated." His voice was cold, each word cutting through the air like a blade. "I want you to think about the kind of people you are. You insulted someone who has given everything to this company, someone who built it from the ground up. And for what? Because she doesn't fit your narrow definition of what a leader should look like?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably, but Elias wasn't finished. "You will all answer for this. Your positions, your reputations, your future at Storm CP, they're all on the line. And the truth is, I don't need any of you to succeed. I have Nina." With that, Elias turned to Nina, who had been quietly standing by his side throughout the entire meeting. He nodded to her, signaling that she had the final word. Nina stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "You will never disrespect me again." So, fallout was immediate and unforgiving. Elias and Nina wasted no time in taking action. The executives who had mocked her were swiftly removed from their positions, their careers disintegrating before their eyes. Diane Brooks, Greg Palmer, and Tyler Hensley were all terminated on the spot, their contracts nullified. Mark Evans and Laura Chen weren't spared either. Both of them were quietly escorted out of the building, their names tarnished beyond repair. The board of directors, once so loyal to the old guard, scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. But it was too late. The damage was done and the reputation of Storm CP was forever altered. The executives who had once held the company's future in their hands were now nothing more than footnotes in its history. Elias and Nina watched as the pieces fell into place. Their vision for the company, built on respect and integrity, had begun to take shape. Storm CP was no longer a corporation run by arrogant, entitled individuals. It was a company built on the values of hard work, dedication, and mutual respect. But while the executives were removed, the ripple effects of their actions lingered. The truth about their treatment of Nina spread like wildfire through the media, turning the once untouchable company into a symbol of corporate corruption. And Nina, for the first time in years, was finally able to step into the light and claim her place as the true heart of Storm CP. The day after the board meeting, Nina and Elias sat in their office, the weight of what had transpired still hanging over them. The media was ablaze with the news of the corporate shakeup at Storm CP. The The story had hit the headlines with all the right drama. The woman who built the empire, publicly humiliated by a group of elitist executives, only to turn the tables in a spectacular power play. But while the public was thrilled by the story, there was a darker side to it that Elias and Nina couldn't ignore. There was someone else involved in this betrayal. Nina's phone buzzed as she stared at the articles flashing across her screen. A text from an unknown number popped up. "I hope you enjoyed the show, but this is far from over." Her fingers froze on the screen. She knew what it meant. There was someone behind the executives, someone who had orchestrated this entire humiliation. Elias read the message over her shoulder. His jaw tightened. "They're still playing games. Someone's pulling the strings, Nina. And I think I know who." Nina's heart dropped. Elias had a suspicion, and it didn't take long for him to confirm it. The text came from none other than Derek Vance, one of the co-founders of Storm CP and Elias's former business partner. Derek had always been an enigma. His ambitions far outstripped the company's original vision. While Elias and Nina focused on creating an innovative tech ecosystem, Derek's sights had always been on power and wealth. "He's been lying low, playing the long game," Elias muttered, "and now he thinks he can take us down." The tension between Elias and Derek had been brewing for years, but this was the first time Nina had been drawn into their conflict. Derek's role in the boardroom had always been subtle, a master of behind-the-scenes manipulation. But now it was clear. He was ready to bring everything crashing down to seize control of the company he had always believed should have been his. Nina clenched her fists. "We can't let him get away with this. We've already lost so much." Elias's face hardened. "We won't. He's underestimated us before. He won't do it again." They both knew this wasn't just about business. It was about loyalty, betrayal, and the fight for everything they had built. The next few days were filled with late-night strategy sessions. Nina and Elias were relentless, working tirelessly to uncover Derek's next move. They knew he wouldn't give up easily. In fact, Derek had always been a step ahead, hiding in the shadows and waiting for the right moment to strike. But what he didn't know was that Nina had her own strategies, ones she had developed over years of quietly observing and building her knowledge. She had been working in the shadows of Storm CP for a reason, and now it was time to use those skills to turn the tables on Derek. "We need leverage," Nina said, her voice steady but filled with intent. "We can't just play defense. We need to take the fight to him." Elias nodded. "I agree. Derek's always been about control. We'll use that against him." Together, they devised a plan. Nina would start by securing vital evidence of Derek's underhanded dealings, his secret financial transactions, illicit business partnerships, and covert deals that could potentially bring down his empire. Meanwhile, Elias would use his connections to build a network of supporters within Storm CP who had grown disillusioned with Derek's leadership and were ready to stand with them. It wasn't going to be easy. Derek was well connected, and his power ran deep. But Nina and Elias knew they had something Derek didn't: loyalty. While Derek had tried to manipulate people, they had spent years building meaningful relationships with employees, clients, and investors who trusted them. It was time to use that trust to their advantage. Weeks passed, and the tension continued to mount. Storm CP's stock prices fluctuated wildly, and the company's reputation teetered on the edge. Derek had been making his moves, trying to sway public opinion and rally support from the remaining executives. But Nina and Elias had stayed ahead of him, slowly accumulating the pieces they needed to expose his corruption. It all came to a head one fateful evening in the boardroom. Nina, Elias, and a small group of their most trusted allies gathered around the table, preparing for the confrontation with Derek. They knew this would be the moment that determined everything: their future, the company's future, and the legacy they had spent years building. Derek arrived with his usual air of arrogance, confident that he had the upper hand. "I see you've gathered your little team," he sneered, surveying the room with disdain. "But you can't stop what's coming. This company was always meant to be mine." Elias stood up, his eyes cold and unyielding. "You're wrong. Derek, Storm CP isn't yours. It's ours. Nina joined him at the table, holding up a stack of documents. I think you'll find these papers say otherwise, she said, her voice calm but filled with resolve. She slid the documents across the table. Derek's eyes widened as he realized what she had in her hands, the evidence of his illegal activities, the dirty dealings he had kept hidden for years. The room fell silent. Derek's confident facade cracked as he reached for the documents, his hands trembling. You can't. I can, Nina interrupted. And I just did. The executives in the room, those who had once been loyal to Derek, now saw him for what he truly was, a fraud. Slowly, one by one, they began to distance themselves from him, their support shifting to Elias and Nina. Derek's world unraveled before him. The power he had once believed was his for the taking was slipping away. And in that moment, Elias and Nina knew. They had won. In the days that followed, Storm CP underwent a dramatic transformation. Derek was removed from the company, his assets seized, and his reputation destroyed. The board of directors, once loyal to him, now answered to Elias and Nina. Together they set a new course for the company, one built on trust, transparency, and innovation. But the victory came at a cost. The battle for Storm CP had taken its toll on both of them. Nina was exhausted, mentally and physically, from the constant pressure and the personal betrayal she had experienced. Elias, too, had been affected by the long months of tension, but his determination never wavered. Together they had weathered the storm, and now they could finally begin to rebuild. With Derek gone, the company was free to chart its own course. Nina and Elias focused on strengthening their relationships with employees, partners, and clients. They made it their mission to create a company culture that valued people over power, integrity over manipulation. As Storm CP began to heal, so did their relationship. The shared trauma they had endured brought them closer, solidifying the bond they had always shared. They knew they could face anything together. As Storm CP entered a new era, Nina and Elias stood on the rooftop of their headquarters, gazing out at the city below. The storm had passed, but they knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would always be challenges, obstacles, and forces working against them. But they had come through the worst of it, and they were stronger for it. Nina turned to Elias, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "We made it," she said softly. Elias nodded, his expression filled with quiet pride. Together. And as they stood there, side by side, the future of Storm CP no longer seemed uncertain. It was theirs to shape, and with their shared vision, there was nothing they couldn't accomplish. As the final chapter closes on Nina and Elias's journey, we're reminded of the strength that comes from loyalty, resilience, and fighting for what's right, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Their story isn't just about business, it's about overcoming betrayal, reclaiming power, and rebuilding what was once lost. Together, they proved that when you stand strong, no one can take away what you've built. But the story doesn't end here. This is only the beginning, and who knows what the future holds for Storm CP, Nina, and Elias. Stay tuned for more twists, turns, and unexpected moments, because with them, the battle is far from over. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on the next chapter of our journey. And remember, your support helps us continue telling stories that inspire and entertain. Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts. What would you do in Nina and Elias's shoes? See you in the next episode.